Okay. Yeah.
A sliver of sun, a trick of the trade, hole in the wall, edge of a blade.
Hello and welcome to Open Studio, a podcast from the Arts Council of Princeton, spotlighting the creative minds shaping our cultural landscape. We sit down with the artists, makers, and creative thinkers from our community to talk about the work they do and the ideas that inspire them. Co-hosted by the Director of Development and Community Engagement, Liza Peck, and by me, Adam Welch, Executive Director. Open Studio invites you into the stories behind the art. Today is our very good fortune to be speaking with the one and only Elizabeth Margulis. So, what happens in our mind when music plays? Not just what we hear, but what we see, what we remember, and what we feel unfolding inside. Today, we're diving into that question that seems simple on the surface, but opens into something deeper. How does music shape the inner world of the human mind? Our guide on this journey is Princeton professor Elizabeth Margulis, a scholar whose work sits at a fascinating crossroads, where music meets psychology, neuroscience, and imagination. She's not just asking why we like certain songs or how rhythm works. She's asking something far more intriguing. When we listen to music, why does your mind start telling stories? Elizabeth is a leading scholar in the interdisciplinary field of music cognition, serving as a professor of music at Princeton University. At the core of her research is a deceptively simple question: what happens in the mind when we listen to music? Her studies show that when people listen to instrumental music, they often generate vivid mental narratives. While these narratives feel personal, her work demonstrates that listeners frequently produce strikingly similar interpretations, especially when they share cultural backgrounds. This insight challenges the common idea that music is a universal language, suggesting instead that musical meaning is shaped by shared cultural experience. Across cultures and across listeners, music can produce patterns of shared imagination, what she calls a kind of cognitive inner storytelling. But here's the twist. Those shared experiences aren't universal. They're shaped by culture, memory, and the environments we grow up in. In other words, music doesn't just express emotion. It helps construct meaning, and that meaning lives somewhere between the individual and the group. Even more, there are implications beyond the lab, from understanding Alzheimer's and dementia to exploring how music creates social bonds, even among strangers. This research points to music as more than art. It's a kind of cognitive technology shaping how we remember, imagine, and connect. Because the next time a song gets stuck in your head, or a melody seems to carry you somewhere else, the real question might not be, why do I like this? But, what is my mind doing with this sound? Let's find out. Please join me and Liza Peck as we speak with Elizabeth in our studios at the Arts Council of Princeton.
Time is water, my water is spilling. Reservoir run dry, my days are filling. My heart is a tunnel, my back is laughing. My tongue a funnel, my pulse in traffic.
I'm just thinking, like, I wish the music department felt more like this, because it feels like if you come in here, you just want to make a thing.
Okay, making a thing is good. Yeah. So this is only our fourth.
Yes. I thought we were saying four.
Four.
We go with Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll do what?
Go with Elizabeth.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Okay.
Elizabeth it is.
Yeah. Are you ready?
Hello.
Sure.
You
okay.
ready?
Good. Yeah.
Take us away.
Oh, I'm starting.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we on right now? Okay.
We're live.
Oh my gosh. Wait, Elizabeth, I've heard your name pronounced a couple of different ways.
I usually say it Margulis.
Okay.
Yes.
We have not been saying it the right way around here.
What have we been
We've been saying it faster. Margulis.
Margulis.
And I listened to your NPR talk. Nice, by the way. And I meant to say, Adam, let's take note. It's Margulis.
Margulis, yeah.
And I like the way that you said it so, like, sweetly, like, this is how some people say it. Like, that's your name. Like, you're allowed to say
I don't have a strong feeling
This is
about
the
it.
right way to say it. Well, thank you so much for being here, Elizabeth. We're so excited to speak with you about what you do.
It is my
super
pleasure.
cool.
Thank you for having me.
But before we begin what it is you do, we have a question for you. What is your favorite word?
I think my favorite word is maybe my favorite word because I learned it from one of my children. So my middle child, between the ages of about 5 and 8, was obsessed with birds in the way that old men are obsessed with birds. So we were up at the crack of dawn every weekend, out with the local Audubon Society. And the word I learned from my child was murmuration. And I think the reason I love that word is not only because it epitomizes, something that is very true about my life, which is many of the things that I've come to be most curious about and interested in came from my children or my students or something. But secondly, that I didn't feel like I had been noticing them until I had a word for it. So there's also just this power to having a concept or a name that can attune you to things that are happening in the world that are interesting that might have gone unnoticed.
Well, clearly what you do is influencing your children, because murmuration is probably not a word that a child in a family that isn't very focused on the auditory world
That's fair.
would come to.
I've never heard that word, murmuration.
I love it.
Have you heard it?
Does your son do you use Merlin, that Merlin app?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm
Although
also
it
like
didn't
an old man,
exist
sort
during
of
this
obsessed.
time when he was obsessed, so you really had to learn the song. What I
They're
love about
lovely.
Merlin is that shortcut to what the birds sound like, right?
Yes.
And, yeah,
And all the info right there.
absolutely.
Gotta love
yeah,
an
it's
app.
magical.
Okay. So do you play the bird song to try to get the bird to reply?
So what our child loved to do at that time was learn there's little noises you make that make the birds excited and respond. It's this kind of like pshing. I can't do it, but he was really expert at that time. This is really one of the things about parenting that has been most amazing to me is just spheres of the universe you would never have come into contact with. You suddenly have.
But also, you may have added an avenue towards it in terms of the auditory portion and how that.
I hadn't really thought about
resonates.
that, but I guess that's true. Right. So maybe they're interested in a lot of things. And the things that kind of have some crossover, I prick my ears up to, and then that becomes.
Exactly. Yeah. How does a certain bird song make you feel? It's kind of part of all of this.
Yeah, you're honestly the first person that's made that connection to me. You're probably right.
Well, I mean, you should study that. That's the next step, the bird song.
Next step for Elizabeth. I'm glad that we're
Grateful Dead's bird song.
charting out her path forward.
No, there
I'm
is
sure
a whole.
she needs us to help her with that.
Give you a job to do. Let's give you something. Let's give
Exactly.
you some work.
Let's just need some tasks.
Murmuration. Love it. That's a great first word. Great first step.
Yeah.
All right.
Good one.
So I don't know how true this is, but what first drew you from being a classical pianist into studying the science of music?
Yes. Well, maybe two things. One is that when I was growing up, I was a big fan of all the pop science, cognitive science books at that time. So at that time, this was like Douglas Hofstadter's Gödel Escher Bach, or like Marvin Minsky's Society of Minds, or Daniel Dennett books. Do you remember these? Yeah. So really into those. Had even.
But can you say a little bit about what were you taking away from those books? That was
So this was at the
important.
time I was experiencing that as quite separate from my interest in music. I was a classical pianist and just doing a lot of that. And then over here, I was just interested in the mind, right? They're just the ideas that were coming out in that book and the way that you could kind of have these very concrete ways of asking questions about
right.
issues that seem quite philosophical was just very interesting and exciting. But then I really made this very intentional decision to go to conservatory instead of going to college. And the whole point was that I would just really lock in and commit to piano and just have those 4 years and see what happened.
So you were thinking at that point that you would have a life that would be performance driven.
Absolutely. Yes. no question. And actually, as I look back on it, especially now as a parent of children who were in college and had to make similar decisions, I'm kind of impressed that my parents were so chill about this choice.
Were you the last or first?
I was the first.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's rare.
Yeah.
But it's not a chaotic decision. I mean, it's an intentional decision.
Yes. And they were correct that you could not have argued me out of it. Like, it wouldn't have gone well. And, I really had to do that to come through that and out on the other side.
They must be so disappointed about where you ended up.
I've heard that, actually.
We talked to your parents earlier, and they're like,
I actually try to remember that when my children make questionable choices. I'm like, you know what? Sometimes they know better than I might know. But it is true that then while I was at conservatory, the part of my brain that was interested in these other subjects had not just shut down, right? And so I was really trying to commit and trying to focus. But the more I did that, the more I had questions about what it was that I was doing, right?
And also, I guess maybe going all the way back to the beginning of what it is that you do now, the music was having your mind go into certain directions.
Absolutely. Yes. And, just basic questions like why, if you spend all day being like, oh, if you just voice this so there's more weight in the pinky, it's so much better. It's like, why that? Why is that helping?
That is a very niche, that is something probably no one else would understand.
That's the thing. I had to come out. So basically what happened is I went and took a class at another university. So got on a bus, went down, took this class called Minds, Brains, and Computers, had to expressly disobey the instructions of my piano teacher. I was like, not supposed to do that. I should stay and practice. Did it anyway. And already in that first class period, it was so clear to me how some of these methods that people were using at that time to ask questions about language, that you could just shift them slightly and use them to answer some really interesting questions about music. So I think I really had a conversion experience pretty much, in my first class meeting there. But I did have to come all the way around full circle, eventually in my adult career back to these kinds of questions that you were just referencing about, what are you imagining when you're listening? Because I had been quite brainwashed in conservatory to think in this very close way about notes and something that's very different from how you might encounter music in a more casual or first listening kind of way.
So where did the freedom to move away from that come from?
I was really fortunate in that through various kinds of happenstance, I ended up at a university at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the students had not been brainwashed in the same way. They had different kinds of musical experiences and different kinds of musical training. And it was really the students who were in my lab at that time who kept talking to me about this imaginative dimension to music listening. It really took those conversations for me to realize that actually also in myself, that was actually really important in a way that I had perhaps been neglecting.
That's pretty lovely.
So I might not know anything about this, but can you tell me, at the conservatory, you don't do any theory, no study on theory?
You do theory, but have you taken music theory, Adam?
I have not. That's why I know nothing about. I listen to music, but I know nothing about music theory. I didn't know if music theory might just be specifically on the theory of notes and like when you're supposed to play certain notes and sound. Or
Great question.
They get involved with some of the philosophical aspects.
Right. Certainly, yes. But the other thing is that a lot of the sort of parts of music theory that at that time, okay, this is now 30 years ago or whatever, were parts of the undergraduate conservatory curriculum, just kind of reified some things about the structures of the notes that were not really recognizable from a perceptual vantage point, right?
Can you dumb that down a tiny bit?
It would be like, here's a label for these notes that do that. But when you came down to it, I mean, you could math around with that on the page or kind of where's Waldo, the dots.
Right.
But it really did not feel like it was providing much insight into why this particular moment is so
Feels.
powerful or something. So for me, what was really missing is this perceptual piece. So really this focus on the experience rather than merely on the notes. And again, not all music theory is like that, but this is just the kind that I was exposed to at that time.
And it sort of feels like, and this is such an amateur point of view, I recognize that, but if you're not thinking about the feeling portion, isn't that the whole point? I mean, isn't that everything?
Well, that's what I'm a little confused about, because
Yeah.
I know, studying art myself, not music, when you study art theory or this color theory, or all of that plays into. So like if I was trying to make an analogy to, or some sort of analogous thought to music.
To visual domain, yeah.
You'd have, these colors make you feel this way, right? So these notes, I would think that there was a parallel existence in music where these notes make you feel this way. These combinations of notes make you see this color. I don't know, something like that. So that's why when I asked about music theory, because there's art theory and then aesthetics, and everything seems like in art, it seems to have blossomed where, there's so much writing and centuries of aesthetic discussion on art. So it's so ingrained in what I know and how I look at art and how I think about art and how I make art. It's interesting to hear that.
Yeah, well, let me maybe
art.
introduce one more distinction in terms of how music theory thinks about things. So I think what you're describing is a descriptive orientation. So, this is how color can be perceived, right? So that's like describing something about how you might see a work of art. But music theory got really excited for some time about a more prescriptive enterprise. So, let us give you scaffolding to have a certain kind of experience. Like we will teach you to think about these structures in this way. And now you can have this really other kind of cool, deep experience with the music, which is completely valid. But
who's building the structure? Like who?
Right. So, well, for me, what I ended up doing was thinking back to what was my earliest, most powerful musical experience that I could remember, because surely I knew nothing. And so what was going on there that could give rise to something that was meaningful to me. And
was it the Beastie Boys?
it's kind of the opposite of the Beastie Boys. So I'm kind of embarrassed to confess this, but I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and my parents took me to a performance of Handel's Messiah. And I didn't understand that in the Hallelujah chorus, right? There's a tradition where you stand the line for King of Kings, right? I didn't know that was...
And it's just gorgeous.
It is just gorgeous, absolutely. But to me, as a young child, looking around, I thought that people stood up because they were just so moved that they could no longer sit in their seats. They just rose like spontaneously from.
But perhaps it originated that way. I mean, maybe that's how it started.
Well, there's a whole specific history.
Oh, okay.
I know I was like, this was not a correct take. But it did give me this expansive sense of what music could do, right? And then that became what I ended up being most curious about, was not, once I had a bunch of training and was thinking about things in this way, how was that possible? But more, how can music kind of reach in and captivate you before you have some specialized kind of training?
Right.
I guess that sort of leads us into the next question, is what does music cognition mean to you?
Yes. So basically, music cognition is a really interdisciplinary field that has existed. There's a scholarly society called the Society for Music Perception and Cognition that has existed since, I think, about the 80s. And it's really...
Perception and cognition. Did you say perception?
Yes, perception and cognition. Exactly. And it's a group of philosophers, anthropologists, psychologists, music theorists, computer scientists, all connected around questions about how music is experienced. So focusing specifically on the listener, on the performer, on the person, and, what we can learn about the human mind, the human brain by looking at music. What can we understand about music by translating knowledge that we have about human psychology. So just that whole set of questions at the intersection between music and actual experience.
Which I think when you talk about Handel's Messiah, and I think it takes us to the religious world of music and what an extraordinary role it plays. More so in different circumstances, but certainly religious music has been kind of the benchmark for emotion that's pulled.
Yeah, this sort of gets at one of the core kind of issues and questions in this field, is that people really argue about our object of study, like what is music, which maybe it seems like kind of a boring navel gazing question, but is actually ends up being pretty interesting when you start looking at it, because for example, there are languages that don't have a separate word for music or religious ritual, right? That those are the same thing, or have a word for song and a word for instrumental music, but not a word for some category that views those as something shared. You can have a set of sounds that sounds musical to one person and doesn't sound musical to another person. And what are the stakes there? And so something that I've always been really interested in there is this really cool illusion that Diana Deutsch discovered called the speech to song illusion, where you can take a little clip of speech, repeat it a bunch of times, and then what started out sounding like speech after the repetitions comes to sound like music. And what I love about that is that nothing changed in the sound itself, but we start listening. We're perceiving it. We have some frame that we've changed. And then so that lets you ask what that frame is and what it is like and means to hear something musically. So yeah, I think that's a question. What is music that sounds like it might be really boring, but when you get into it is actually pretty interesting.
I'm curious, that effect that you just mentioned, is that for the listener?
Yeah,
or
the listener.
For the person that's saying it on repeat? Or does it have to be done musically? Like, do you have to do it in a recording? Or if I continue to say it over and over again, does it have the same effect?
Great question. So the most easiest to produce illusion, easiest to produce illusion comes from recorded speech. Yeah.
Because my inflection would change after I said it the third time, and I'd start to garble it probably. So
exact repetition is best. I mean, there is a thing just in speech called semantic satiation. I don't know if you know about this.
That should have been the word, satiation.
Also a good word. That's true. Where just if you repeat a word a bunch of times.
Wait. Before we go on, let's actually try this. So Elizabeth says repetition doesn't just make things familiar. It can completely change how we hear them. The first time you hear a word, your brain locks onto its meaning. The second time, you already know what's coming, and that's when something shifts. Your attention starts to drift away from the meaning and towards sound. So let's push it. I'm going to repeat a phrase. Elizabeth saying semantic satiation. Just listen. At some point, it stops feeling like language. It starts to sound off. The words are breaking apart into weird little noises. That's the shift she's talking about. Repetition pulls meaning apart and leaves you with the raw texture of sound. And yeah, it's a little trippy. So what started as a simple phrase becomes something entirely different just because you heard it again and again and again. Here's Elizabeth. Semantic satiation.
Semantic satiation, 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 semantic satiation. You start to have this kind of trippy experience where you no longer have immediate access to what it means, and you're kind of locked into something about how weird the word sounds.
You have that with names and
Yes. And I love that because it's a similar, phenomenon where something's either devolving into nonsense or devolving into music, and then I think that is a fun parallel.
Yeah, that was just interesting. I hadn't thought about it before, but it would be curious to know what effect that by me saying it on repeat versus you hearing it on repeat. I don't have the same experience.
Right. Well, we do know a little bit about this illusion and who has it under what circumstances. So it's easier. Right. You're more susceptible to the illusion if it's a clip of speech in a language you don't speak. Then it's like even easier for you.
Interesting.
And then the more it gets so that you're like really clinging to the spoken interpretation, it gets relatively harder.
This doesn't have any connection to hypnotism, does it?
Oh, well, there is actually a really long and interesting history of, I mean, I suppose not exactly hypnotism, but although probably, but the history that I know more about is music and psychedelics and how music's been used in kind of controlled administering of, LSD and so forth. Yeah.
So
That
we're
experiment
so
happened.
we're so off our question base right now, but I can't let this go. I know we're not even at question 3.
LSD. Exactly. And moving to the next question.
But I do feel like there is such a connection to kind of like openings in areas of your mind that music has. And I know that you've spoken to this a lot, and especially when you think about that sort of autobiographical portion of it, how music, and I think I've read that you've spoken about this a bit, so I'm sorry to be repetitive, but I think that music can bring you to a place where it's not like, oh, I remember this song makes me remember this. It's like, no, I'm feeling like my 14-year-old self in like my backyard, like exactly where you were and how it felt. And it's very different than a memory. It's like a reliving, right? Yes. Yeah. And that kind of feels like that same thing, that things are happening or opening in your brain in a way that isn't very different than your like sort of cognitive memories.
Exactly. That's this transportive capacity that I got increasingly curious about over the last decade, and, did a bunch of work with our group on, and now have this book coming out called Transported: The Everyday Magic of Musical Daydreams, that really explores the science of exactly this kind of experience where you're listening to music and sort of the room, fades away and you find yourself somewhere else.
And if you were going to take this transportive concept and make it for dummies, what would you say is happening in your brain when you're having that transport? Like what, or on a very simple level?
Yeah. So maybe I'll start by talking a little bit about what we know about what happens. What used to happen more before we had screens, when your mind's wandering, right? So the latest kind of statistics I know about this are from 2016, where at that time we spent about a third to a half of our day mind wandering. So, as you're doing the dishes or right, you're walking from one place, but it ends up you're kind of reflecting on. So reliving things that happened to you in the past, right? You're kind of floating to something that happened before, replaying that, imagining how something else might go. And there's this kind of just engagement with the stories that constitute kind of who you are and what your life's about. And it turns out that's a really key brain function. Like you have to do that. You're not doing that is not good. And increasingly,
so getting kind of caught in that space far away from where you are is an okay thing.
Yes, it turns out to be quite adaptive, right? That's part of how identity is being consolidated and creative, new pathways are emerging, right? It's really important kind of basic function. And increasingly, we're just not spending the amount of time that people previously had engaged in that state.
When you speak of it as like washing dishes, like some of the stuff that we used to do that we just don't do as much anymore. That I don't wash dishes, but like some of those sort of like
or you put
tasks,
like the phone on the windowsill.
Exactly, and you're watching something.
While you're doing the dishes, that kind of thing. And so, something that I'm interested about with music is the way that, if you look around the subway and you see a lot of people like on screens, if they're not on a screen, they're often at minimum earbuds in and they're listening to music. And I just seems to me that music listening period is one of these rare contemporary windows into this continued kind of imaginative, recollective function of our brain. And, that's something that we saw that was really cool when we brought people into the MRI machine. So we're like looking at what's happening in their brain while they're listening to music. And we can...
Wow. So what could you take away from it?
We're not going to be able to get through a thought.
I'm sorry. I completely
this is
took
great.
over.
This is great.
No,
This is
so unfair.
This is great. We're jumping all over, but that's fine.
Okay, we're not going to talk like you're
I'm just
MRI
inspired by the art in this room
The MRI.
to follow the threads.
But I mean, I am
MRI
sort of
machine's cool.
fascinated by what you could see in a brain in an MRI machine, and who's choosing the music, and what is the music?
Right. So basically what, where this study comes from, I'm sorry that I have to digress to explain how we got there.
That's fine.
We're blowing it for you, I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. It's good to have a little meander. A little.
As
We'll go back to LSD in a minute. But
full circle. We had this kind of very unconstrained behavioral task. So normally, if you're going to give people some kind of tasks to do in some behavioral study about music, it might be something really simple that you can measure really easily, like reaction time or something. And instead, what we were doing was bringing people in to a sound attenuated booth one at a time, playing them an excerpt that had no words in it, that they had told us they'd never heard before, right? And just asking them to, if they imagined a story, type out what story they imagined. So now here we are several months later, and we just have all these stories that, individual people have given us to this set of previously unfamiliar excerpts. And we just find that for excerpt after excerpt, the stories that people are telling us are similar down to really uncanny,
It's just really kind of crazy
details, like very concrete elements of the story.
And this is what you're talking about. Yeah.
This is
I am
what was
so
saying.
uncomfortable with
This
it.
is what I was saying. This is what I got from your talk.
Yeah,
and
people
like
are
it.
uncomfortable, which is why we separately developed an entire creative agency scale and validated this so that we could measure how much people thought they were imagining this freely, like of their own personal
But how could they be doing anything but imagining freely? You haven't presented anything but the music.
Right. I mean, and they are. Don't get me wrong. They're
You're
imagining
saying word
freely.
prompts
It's
or-
just that it turns out that, we are quite constrained and choreographed to some degree by not just what we're hearing, but how what we're hearing connects to things we've heard before and the associations that had. So in some sense, sort of like every experience we've had in our life leading up to that moment is kind of triggering that the easiest pathway to go down imaginatively. And that means because music happens in these shared sociocultural ways, that music can tap into some of these shared sociocultural kind of tropes. So basically then when we went into the scanner, we were using these same excerpts that we knew were likely to trigger some shared imagining. And because we knew what specific thing people were likely to imagine, we could also have them come in separately and listen to spoken versions of these stories. And then compare the brain activity between listening to the story and listening to the music.
Interesting. So once you knew what the story was that they were supposed to hear, you would play the story to them separately
Correct.
and see if the brain synapses.
Correct. And so then what we could see is that within particular excerpts, we could see these distinct activation patterns in the default mode network, which is exactly this mind-wandering scene construction network.
And in a way, music is almost just like a side story to what you're learning about the brain.
Right. And so this is kind of exactly what I mean about the questions, the way I was trying to move from music theory and what I was exposed to as an undergraduate to a kind of question that was like, wait, music is a part of our world and it's a part of who we are and how we relate to one another. And those are kind of the things that are most interesting about music. Like we care about music insofar as it relates to, us and how we understand each other. So that is that like slight
as simple as,
shift
making a mixtape for your friend. I mean, just sort of wanting to, it's a sort of a way of sharing a thing that is harder to share in any other format.
Exactly. And I mean, I think we have pretty good evidence that people experience music that way. Because if you look at dating profiles, for example, one of the like most foregrounded information tends to be music case, right? There's just a whole bunch you can communicate about yourself,
right? Simply
through that. Mm-hmm. So, I think that is a very intuitive way of thinking about music. It just took a minute for how we're studying it to really catch up with those uses, I think.
Right.
Huh. Now, here's the side question. No, you probably used all classical music that have weird titles. Do any... Well, it's like symphony and
Said like a ceramicist
But-
would.
Really, arts council person?
Well,
Really?
do any of the stories match up to the like the Flight of the Bees or whatever?
Yeah.
That's right. So
Well, you're not giving anyone titles, are you? Or are you?
No, we are not.
No, but you know the title of the music.
Correct.
So
Right.
when you played it,
Oh, you're
title-
saying does the title
because
represent?
yeah,
what
what they
people were-
saw.
Yeah.
Because the artist, author, musician, whatever,
Had a feeling.
would have had a feeling, you would think.
Mhm.
So did science prove that they were correct in their...
Okay, this is a great question. And
It's
I
a
will
good
say, first
question.
of all,
Not on the question list, of course.
that we've studied music in as many genres as possible.
Mhm.
So we have papers where there's like 17 different genres and everything. But that, to follow up on this specific question, in one of our studies, we actually were able to collaborate with Princeton University concerts and collect data from concert goers who were just part of that subscription series.
Who, of course, are willing to share that because
They were lovely.
They're
It was
Princeton.
wonderful. I think it was like not what they were expecting, and then it was great. It was a performance of the Takash String Quartet with Stephen Huff, who's a pianist and a composer. And the reason this relates to your question is there was a little surprise the night of the performance that nobody had warned us about, which was that what we're at. Let me remind you, what we're asking people about are the things they're imagining while they're listening to
Right.
these excerpts. So Stephen Huff, the composer of the second piece on the first half, comes out beforehand, unbeknownst to us previously, and proceeds to tell the audience exactly what he thought about and imagined while
interesting.
composing this piece. And I'm sitting there with all the researchers in the lab, and we're all looking at each other like, oh my God, like it was so much involved in preparing
Well,
for this night and
yeah.
everything. We missed this one key piece. But
That's going to screw everything up.
that does take away some of the objectivity.
but also that's really kind of what doing research is like. There's just always
Yes.
some surprise
No
like
more
that.
is it a controlled experiment.
So the grad student who's in charge of this project, Hannah Wilkie, had this brilliant idea, which is, okay, well, now we can actually use that
Yep.
to ask another sort of question. And basically for all these analyses that I've been describing today, we use tools from natural language processing and machine learning to like look at how semantically related things are and measure them and all of that. And so we applied that same set of tools and instead of just looking at how similar people are to each other around that excerpt, we looked at how similar they were to all the content in what Stephen Huff had said he was thinking about. And so what we could see is that, yes, what he said was influencing what people were imagining, but there was lots of agreement between people over and above the content
what
of
he
his
is
speech. So
saying.
there was something coming from the sound too, not just from what he was
and
saying.
maybe he was pulling that out a bit more than would have happened if he hadn't.
Right. And then, and we
Pushed
do
it
know
a bit.
for the pieces you're imagining that were written like hundreds of years ago, people can have extremely coherent agreement about what story they're imagining, but it's completely unrelated to what the composer titled the piece after. And presumably this is because these kind of associations coalesce and operate in particular times and places around these, the way the music's being used, and just the way it's being used now is different than in 1832 or whatever. So
Exactly, and that's what you said. You said it's so much structured, not cultural constructions, but essentially cultural constructions that whatever was transpiring in 1832 is nothing close to what we're experiencing today.
Exactly.
So,
And what's cool about that then is it actually lets you do this active historical imagination. I think that's what some people in sound studies really enjoy doing, is like, oh, well, now if we're not hearing it the way people heard it in 1832, but we're hearing kind of this same set of sounds, like, can we look at archival sources about what people were thinking about then and kind of try to get behind their ears and imagine what it would have been like, what experiences you would have had to have to hear it in this other way.
so let me ask you this. You said earlier that because some cultures don't have a name for songs that are music or songs that are instrumental versus singing or what have you. And we spoke recently about and I'm sure you're familiar with some cultures or some time periods that didn't have words for certain colors.
Oh,
right? They
right.
say, yeah. So,
oh, absolutely.
so if that's true, which it's documented, and you were just talking a little bit about sounds, the sounds are the same, you said,
Right.
but are we
But not
sure
exactly
the
also right.
sounds are the
Yes.
same,
No.
right? Because
yeah. No,
like,
you're
we
completely
have-
right.
So that's got to be different.
Even
That's
in
gotta be
terms of
different.
what A was tuned to and what the instruments are made out of and what are the strings.
And do we?
Yeah.
And because we have maybe access to more tonal variety or tonal variations than
Yeah,
they
tuning,
might have
different
then?
tuning practices and
So is it
Yeah.
the same as somebody?
yeah, no,
Right?
that's an excellent question.
That's
Right.
it's
But
difficult to-
now you can kind of have this little mini version of that question by taking just literally the same recording and transporting it from one place to another and looking at the imaginings that arise then, because then you kind of factor out a whole other piece
Mhm.
around, oh wait, the sounds aren't actually the same. Look at cases where they really are the same, and we can still document that people have quite different imaginings depending on their
So-
kind of cultural.
So you're saying the earliest? What would be the earliest known recorded music?
Right. So, well, this is something that people use a lot, is thinking about when we try to think, are we thinking about music in a really ahistorical way?
Mm-hmm.
And we're just assuming that things about how we hear music that come out of the fact that we live in a mediated world where there's recording and sound transmission, or are we thinking about something that's really fundamental about how humans process sound? So one domain people have asked that in is earworms. So it's like, do we just get songs stuck in our head because we're surrounded by repeated music all the time? And then they'll look back and be like, wait, Mark Twain, before the phonograph was, widespread, already had stories about like an earworm that took over a town, right? So and then you go back further and
And
find
so
these
is that just
historical
like a
references.
sequencing that
Yeah.
has a particular
Well, the theory
resonance?
there, right, is that there's this deep relationship between the auditory and the motor systems. So when you're just hearing sound, there's this part of it, especially sound with a beat, like you get in music, where there's this kind of imagined participation. And you get this kind of stuckness on the one hand, but on the other hand, you can get this sense of being really captivated, moving kind of outside yourself into what you're hearing, that I think can be quite powerful about music.
So this is going off track again, and Adam, I'm so sorry. But can I just ask one thing before you get to question number 3?
I think this should be a video just
this
because
is
of the facial expression dynamic.
But I, thinking about how what you spoke about at the Noom conference resonated with Adam, and how I feel like we're in a time where people are looking at wellness from so many different angles, understanding that traditional therapy is not what's going to work for everybody. And so I look at your work and I think obviously kind of you're working towards an area of achieving sort of a feeling of well-being from the experience that different types of music have on you and how that overlaps with the people around you. So you're sharing that as well. And I'm sure I'm not saying that the right way, but I'm sort of interested in as you walk through this sort of journey of learning these things, what you see ahead in terms of.
So there's an amazing community of people that are working at that intersection of, as I'm sure you know, the arts and well-being, but also
Sure.
music and well-being specifically. And two people who've really been at the forefront of that are Francis Collins, who's the former president of the NIH, and the opera singer Renee Fleming.
Mhm.
And they've been devoting a lot of effort to convening, medical professionals and practicing musicians and scientists and clinicians, music therapists, to think through, how can we get these communities who often have very different kind of vocabularies, how can we get them together to really answer some of the questions that you were just posing and get to some world where we appreciate that, music can be this incredibly low barrier to entry way of addressing certain health needs. And maybe the example that is closest to what we've been talking about today is kind of situations where you have some problem with spontaneous thought. So I'm thinking about like depression or anxiety, where you can get really stuck and thinking the same unhelpful thoughts again and again. And if we know that you can just, turn on a song and that can jumpstart some movement in your headspace such that you feel like you're somewhere else and you're, imagining different kinds of things, that's potentially really powerful. And I know, there are really just entire consortiums of people trying to get us to the place where we have the science documented to the point where we can do things like convince insurance companies that, in a preventative way, even they should be like supporting different kinds of music-based interventions. And I think we're really there in a couple of isolated examples of places where we know music is really helpful, but I think there's like a whole broader world there that people are still working towards.
Well, that's interesting. I had a friend who was studying neuroscience, and he was studying memory recall.
Ah, right.
And in order to help with PTSD or trauma. And they were studying bringing that memory back through some sort of memory recall, right? If it was the same song or whatever. And then shocking them basically as soon as that memory came back. So it sort of disconnected that memory from your experience, sort of to erase it. It's kind of interesting because you were sort of, something analogous to that, I guess, would be if you were in a depressive spiral.
Yes.
And you're sort of, and probably thinking about a particular thing to sort of jump you out of it to try a different song. It's interesting. I mean, it's
exactly.
kind of
And people will say things like go outside and take a walk, basically for pretty much the same purpose.
Right.
But sometimes you just can't get out of bed and go take a walk, right? But you might be able to like press play. And so that seems potentially powerful. I mean, a similar way, like question that people have had about this capacity of music to bring back memories applies to dementia. And so there's lots and lots of anecdotal evidence and some scientific evidence that, when you play people who are experiencing dementia, and then you play the music of their adolescence, that not only do these memories come back, but like more alertness. Often these tend to be self-defining memories, the ones that music from your adolescence can bring back. So they also carry with them more of a sense of who you are and what has mattered to you in your life. So that's just another area where this memory triggering power could potentially be really useful.
And it seems as if that adolescent period is a time that is particularly resonant for, I don't know if it's the
identity formation,
plasticity or all of that. Is that part of what you are thinking about a lot? Is like that there are certain ages where you're just going to be way more
the developmental question
engaged.
Is really interesting. Actually, what's fun is that people not only have a reminiscence bump for music of their own adolescence, but they also have a smaller secondary bump for music of their parents' adolescence. So ostensibly this is because when you're, strapped into a high chair or something, like you do not have control over what's being played. So you've had this kind of exposure in these warm home ways, right?
I notice this a lot with my grown-up kids that when I'm listening to their playlist, there's a lot of music that they were listening to that was
very
sort of
validating.
Like their parents. Yeah, it really is.
Which is right.
Exactly. I told you.
Apropos of your thought about erasing memories, have you ever seen the movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? So there's an amazing PhD student here, Jamal Williams, who's now a postdoc at MIT, who led this project where he had people come into the scanner and either watch that entire movie in its original form or watch it with all the music removed, but the dialogue and sound effects were still there. And then he was just looking at brain reactivation patterns when you were watching a scene where the music had played before, and was able to show that for people who are listening to it with the soundtrack, that when you're watching a later scene, the patterns of your brain that are active when you watch an earlier scene.
And that kind of says it all.
Yeah,
in a very simplistic way.
I love his study because I feel like it is this very
it's so tangible,
direct, approach to that question.
Yeah, remember at the Noom talk that somebody brought up what does this mean for the music we play our kids? And I think they were referencing like playing Beethoven in your belly,
right?
Yeah, in utero. But I'm curious, as part of this study you're doing, looking at kids and what is the early songs that we can play, whether it's Mozart. Does that really make them smarter later on versus playing Beastie Boys?
Or hopefully the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Or Red Hot Chili Peppers. I mean, that is a good question.
I mean, you're bringing up one of my field's kind of biggest fails. So I'm just going to give you a confession now, which is there was a study that came out of my field in the early 90s that showed that if you took college students and you administered a spatial reasoning task to them, so is this a rotation of this object? And before they took that task, either played them a Mozart 2 piano sonata or did not, that they did better on this if they had listened to the Mozart. And so it really wasn't the researchers who interpreted it this way, but the press and the general public were very much like, it's a Mozart effect, and all the baby toys played Eine kleine Nachtmusik.
And it's a whole
there were even things
based
like
on that.
the governor of Georgia
baby
proposed,
Mozart,
allocating funding to give every new mother in Georgia a CD of Mozart, so you'd have smart little Georgians. And Florida was like, we won't accredit your daycare.
I think it's also in the point of that is it's maybe not about exactly the Mozart, but it's about being intentional about what you're surrounding your child
so
with.
This is the problem, it turns out, right? That was actually just an arousal effect. You could play Beastie Boys, you can play whatever, as long as it's moderately upbeat, and people will do better. You could even have them just walk on a treadmill. So when it comes to babies, I really think, and kids, the thing to be thinking about is the context in which the music is embedded, the joy that you're having while you're engaging with them. And we have so much good data about that. And so I always hope that's like an anxiety reducing thing to tell parents, is just truly have fun and use the music you like. And that's going to be way more effective to the kind
because you're
goals.
Feeling that joy that's infectious while you're listening to it.
Exactly. I mean, this is like a side rant, but I feel that way about music lessons for kids too. And I feel like that's like a missed opportunity sometimes, where it has this very rote feeling. And I appreciate that you do have to acquire certain skills, but to the degree that it can be gamified and feel joyful, that there's lots of evidence that is the long-term good.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt again. I'm
sorry.
Yeah,
that's okay.
I feel so bad. I can't help myself, but I do want to ask
Don't feel bad.
about...
I have a question too that's not on the question, so that's okay.
Okay, well, this is sort of on your question list, but I'm jumping ahead, which is, as a parent, knowing all this and thinking about this, how has this infused your parenting?
Yeah, this particular project about music evoked imaginings has been the most relevant for me in terms of how I relate to actually both my own parents and my children, because think about if you have a dream, right? Dreams are kind of weird and you kind of want to share them with people, but do not. They're so boring, right? You don't want to hear anyone else's dream. That's a terrible idea. So music... But
sometimes you just can't stop yourself.
This is the thing.
We talk about dreams all the time in here.
What's cool about music evoked daydreams is that because there's like this shared perceptual grounding in a thing you can play for somebody, it is now actually something you can talk about and imaginatively inhabit. And it is like so weirdly interesting, where people of different generations that you care about share what you're... Sometimes that's surprising. Yeah. And sometimes it's really different. That's and then that also triggers a conversation and yields a point of insight. So we've now done this a ton in the car. And I feel like I've gotten to understand what makes my teenagers especially, but also my 11-year-old to a certain extent, what makes them tick that I couldn't have without really them telling me about their kind of like inner imagination while they were listening to these songs. So I truly recommend it.
That alone, if that was the one tool that you could take away from all this work you've done, that's a pretty incredible tool.
Yes, it has truly been one of the most fun things that I've done with my
gaining
parents.
Insight. Or gaining some sort of common ground in which to understand your children a little better.
Exactly. Well, having it's a way in. Like if you ask them what they're thinking about, they've got nothing for you.
Teenagers want to answer you about what are you thinking about? Oh, Mom,
But
sit down.
the music that they care
I'll
about,
tell you.
right? They have it. There's so much going on
Mhm.
inside of them while they're listening to that.
Mhm.
And, you know, if you can really ask them questions about that, and because something we see is that it's actually pretty easy for people to tell you what they're imagining while they're listening. So it's just this way in to something that is, you know, maybe felt like a very internal experience to them, and
Mhm.
now you're sharing about it, and it's just very cool.
Especially if it's a song they've listened to once or twice or 3 times.
Oh, that's the thing.
On repeat, you could
Yes.
start to learn a little bit more.
Yes, and it has also, as a downstream benefit, just made me much cooler and
Mhm.
less get off my lawn, because now I know these bands that
Mhm.
like, you know, the 20-year-olds are
All the kids are
into,
listening
and
to
I
it.
know what's cool about them and how you might think about like approaching them, and that's also been great.
So I'm going to lead back to something you said, I think, in your very first statement about memory consolidation in terms of identity formation.
Yeah.
And you said a third to a half of our lives back in the day were spent daydreaming
Mhm.
so that our minds...
That is really like a staggering fact that I will be thinking about for a while.
I
Other
think
than-
it's only staggering now, because even if I think about like my childhood and adolescence, you can recognize, if you think back,
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
like
You're dreaming a lot of the
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
This entire conversation, which has been almost an hour, I haven't thought about anything that we've been talking about. I've just been dreaming. I've just been dreaming. But it's a good question, though. You had mentioned because of screen time, and if you weren't looking at your screen, you had music playing.
yeah.
Does music not, if we are listening to music during that time, does that not allow us that time to...
Exactly.
And then-
Here's the thing. So I view music as kind of the last refuge of the daydream, right?
Okay.
In the contemporary era,
Okay.
because we will, you know, just walk around listening to that. And that feels like we have
I'm
the
writing that down,
stimulus.
by the way.
But because, you know, it doesn't have, I suppose because there's not the visual aspect and whatever, that we're like supplanting it with this daydreaming, mind wandering kind of imagining. And because we're so kind of desperately in need of that, you know, there is this real benefit to something that might feel like you're not paying attention to the music. And, you know, one of the things I really want to convince people of in the book is that this can be really meaningful and important, and, you know, is not to be viewed as like a failure, because we're so mean to ourselves right now about attention and distraction and stuff. And I just think this is an area where it's very conducive to positive things.
So what about people that listen
you
to
go.
music for lyrics, and people that listen to music and don't know the lyrics?
Yes.
Don't hear the lyrics.
So it turns out this is a very reliable trait level difference, where some people are lyrics listeners.
Mhm.
And if you're a lyrics listener today, you're going to likely be a person who knows the lyrics, you know, 5 years from now. Or you might be like myself, and I can listen to songs again and again and again, and they're my favorite song ever. And I just truly don't know what they're
Oh,
saying.
that's so
Wow.
interesting.
Amazing.
How do you know which person you are? I guess you just think about if you...
She knows.
You
and
can-
I
She
know.
knows.
Honestly,
Yeah.
start singing along. And are you singing along with yeah, or are you singing with the actual lyrics? It's a pretty good litmus test.
That's so interesting.
So what does that say about you, though?
Yeah, there's lots of argument about that. There's not really good information about what that correlates in terms of other characteristics and traits and so forth. But it's a robust, like, stable characteristic itself.
So your husband,
Mhm.
Martin,
Yes.
is he a lyrics guy?
Martin is a lyrics guy.
I mean, he's a
It's
theater
gotta-
guy, so
Martin's
it's
It's
got to be a
an
lyrics
attraction.
guy.
It's got to be a spousal.
If he was not a lyrics guy,
partnership
I would
thing.
question his whole, like, he
She-
spoken word. I mean,
But she spends her whole life studying music and is not a lyrics person.
I know, but like, there's a good intersection there,
It is.
right?
Maybe your partner's got to be the opposite.
Yes,
Hmm.
you're the
That's
music,
interesting
he's the
hypothesis.
words.
Because
I can
my
take that one
partner is the
back.
opposite.
Oh.
Rachel is no lyrics.
Oh.
Really?
And that's why I asked.
Mm.
So we've on to question 4. I think we could skip question
But wait, can
4.
I just have, can I have
Keep
one
on,
more thing
keep
I want to
on,
go
keep
back
on.
to? Okay, so we're talking about like the earworm and the sort of those, for lack of a better word, those autobiographical moments.
Yeah.
Why is it that some are so much more poignant than others, and they might not be musically more what you're inclined to, but there's something about a moment that comes back to you so intensely, do you look into what the reasoning behind that?
No, it can really take you,
Yes.
kind of punch you in the stomach a little bit,
Exactly.
actually. The example, I actually start the book with the end of La La Land, where, do you remember that the character played by Emma Stone goes in, character played by Ryan Gosling is like playing the song when she first met, and takes him this whole kind of journey back to
of what would have happened.
exactly,
Right.
exactly. And so, that's kind of an example where that is special, but is also reflective of this broader truth, which is that something tends to stick in this way when there was some kind of emotion involved, right? So, and that can be positive, that can also be, sad, or it can be something that was really embarrassing, or all of that. So there's often some dimensions
Just
there
sort of
that
an
accounts
intensity of a
partially
moment.
for like why it's sticking around and is able to be triggered by, some
Right.
song playing
Has
at
the
Panera
power.
or whatever.
Right. That's the worst. When you're in McCaffrey's, you're like, oh no, not here.
And also, that's how you know that you've reached a certain age, when they're playing like your favorite teenager songs in McCaffrey's. It's like, oh my God. This is a hyper local podcast when we have the McCaffrey's.
Yes.
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 Reference.
Yeah. Hyperlocal. Okay. What do you got going?
Okay.
And I will
So
say
I
that I love where this is going. I think it's absolutely amazing. We're an hour and
yes,
5 in,
for our
Oh,
25-minute
and we've gotten to
conversation.
question 3. And I
I-
think we've touched on a lot of different things here. But
Yeah, we kind of got to it.
I want to make sure that
right?
I want to make sure you're looking and you need to
I've,
know.
I mean, I gave up on that list a long time ago.
Well, for instance, is music really a universal language? I mean, that is a really important
Okay.
question
Yes.
to ask. And part of this study, which I had no comprehension of, because that was scientific pinpoints everywhere.
I know the figure you're talking about.
Yeah. So universal language.
Universal language, I feel really confident giving you an unqualified no on that. And here's why. So, even though I just spent this hour or whatever talking to you about the fact that I could play people something they never heard before, and they're going to have a similar imagining to someone else, that only works within this culture bounded way. So we did the same thing, but went to a remote village in China where people speak Dong and don't have experience with Western media by and large. And there we found the same thing, that people have very concrete, specific shared imaginings, but totally different from what people were
Is
having
there
in the US.
an overlap, a cultural overlap?
No, to the extent that when we had went back another year and had people do a matching task, like, just here's the excerpt. Here are 2 stories people gave us. Which of these is the story someone else imagined to this excerpt? And so people, US participants looking at US generated stories, do that task at ceiling. Like, it is trivially easy for them to say, you definitely imagined this one and not that one. Whereas then when you move cross-culturally, it's at chance. Despite that, any task formulated the same way about the music, people can do at ceiling. Like, it's not a problem with the task. It's just really those associations that are so obvious within culture, because they're a product of the associations that you're sharing. As soon as you switch that up, are quite different. And so that's, again, this opportunity for like imaginatively inhabiting somebody else's way of hearing, and that's
it's a
cool.
great sort of pure way to study it.
Yes.
Control the study.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, but it's not just that. That's just one example of the very different ways that music can be understood and meaning can be constructed out of it in all these kinds of different ways.
So, I mean, I guess that to go drill down on that a little bit, what did your research reveal about cultural differences in music imagination and musical imagination?
Mm-hmm.
So does the type of music that you play also have an effect between those cultural differences?
Yeah. Okay, great question. So I'm going to get really concrete here for a second. If we so one of the things we tried to do in that study was play people. We, first of all, took a year just like norming everything. So we knew that the excerpts were similarly enjoyable at our US site and in Demon.
I would think that's really important.
Yeah, because that's a huge
Part of
mediating
it,
factor.
right.
Like, the more people like the music, the more narratively engaged they are. And that's just that's true in all the places that we've looked.
So when you're saying normalizing the music, like Kenny G versus Metallica.
Right.
Okay.
So we're like trying to find excerpts that are similarly liked. Okay.
I
Across
love
groups.
that was what you conjured up right there. Kenny G, Metallica.
But you don't want to. You don't
Those are
want
kind
to
of some go-to
Yeah.
examples.
You don't want to go to this.
Of course.
You know,
You want something
this
that
island
just
in
has kind of a-
China or wherever.
Well, we
and
also
play Metallica.
we
right?
also wanted excerpts that would be analogous. So let me give you an example. When we were going to our US site, we're like, okay, here are some kind of instrumental art music excerpts that you've not heard before and don't listen to by choice, but like have heard kind of similar things sort of in the world. So similarly, we also have a set that's of like Chinese instrumental music that the people in Demon are not like voluntarily listening to, but have some ambient familiarity with. So we viewed that as analogous and used both
So
stimulus
it's a
sets in
completely
both
foreign
places.
sound.
It's like something that is, and I mean, that's because at the time that we designed this, we didn't know how easy this was for people. It turns out I can literally play you just the weirdest stuff that where it's like, you know, we made it up and it's bonkers and still elicit like shared sense, because you just then take that and connect it with whatever it does sound most similar to and
Chaos or-
produce something. Like people are just so good at this. But anyway, to make it very concrete, we have an excerpt where US participants will virtually to a person tell you that like someone's alone in a house getting stalked by a murderer, like bad, you know, and the people in Demon will tell you that they're imagining having fun outside playing games with friends.
the same.
The same music. So that's what I'm like. I really want to just bring that
I
example
want to be in
up
the
to
latter
dive
category
home.
always.
Well, I guess, you know, in a way, Friday the 13th or Freddy Krueger, the noises that you might hear that elicit that scared impulse
Yeah.
might be
Jump
the
back
opposite.
and forth between it. Like, yeah, so
Might be
this
the opposite-
excerpt exactly had these like really short notes going back and forth between high notes and low notes. When you try, you're like, oh, I could see how that could sound playful, but it was also super atonal. And so for US listeners, just like as soon as it's atonal, it's like psycho
Yeah.
and someone's going to die.
Oh. Okay.
Do you want to talk about your book
Oh,
a
yeah.
little bit?
Sure. Right. So
It's available for pre-order.
correct. It's coming out May 19th. It's called
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's called Transported, The Everyday Magic of Musical Daydreams. And I really wrote this book actually with my teenagers in mind. So it's just like everything that I would want to tell them about,
Wow.
you know, this work and why it's interesting and what they can take out of it. So this is my first book that I wrote for a general audience in that way. My other books are all like for communities of scholars and academics and whatever.
So this will be a book that parents are interested in reading, or it sounds like
Exactly. It's I really wrote it to be fun to read, to the point that the last time someone in my department read it to talk to me about it, and like somebody in the office, and she was like, I was like laughing, like, am I allowed to laugh? Like, this book is funny. You know, it really is
it's kind of
supposed
like
to be
a
fun treat.
sort of like a spoonful of sugar with your medicine.
Well,
like
what
you're
I
learning
like
something,
about
but it's fun to learn.
The thing I feel proudest about with the book is it is truly 100% accurate scientifically. Like, it is giving you a real textured sense of what it's like to do science about a weird thing like music and the kinds of decisions you make and strategies you use. But I'm also like communicating that, or aspiring to communicate it in a way that is very fun to read. So you don't have to like pick one. It is,
Which I mean, as a non-academic, thank you, but that's well appreciated. It's really nice.
yeah, I had fun. It was a
to
fun
learn that
puzzle
way
to
in
try
a way
to do
that's
that.
sort of
Yeah.
easier to digest, where you're not feeling like, let me read that page again. I didn't understand it.
Well,
It's
there's
nice
just
if
lots
you're-
of things to care about in the world. So it's like a high bar to really think about communicating, you know, the
Right.
things that actually are interesting and meaningful.
It's a real sign of maturity, I think, in terms of your thinking, in terms of
Mhm.
you know how you know also too with your own ego, to be able to go from particularly a field like yours that is so theoretical, conceptual, neuroscience, all this stuff, where you gotta speak in jargon constantly, and you write in jargon, and you want all the people who you care about, you know, in that field to appreciate what you write and what you say, to then go and say, I'm going to write this so that my kids can understand what it is I do and why I do it and why I think it's important.
And my non-academic peers and friends and family can all digest.
Yeah, ultimately, I really hope that this book will stay, if it, my dream for it would be that then when people think about what can you do with science when you apply it to music, they won't think Mozart effect, right? They'll think about this actually like textured work that is about culture and it's about biology. And there's all these, cool paths forward. Maybe it'll, attract people into the field down the road in the way that some of the books I read as a teenager set me down this path ultimately.
I love that.
So, I love that too. So the evil side of this, do composers or do the potential readers of this work, is there a way they can intentionally shape people's minds through music because of this research?
Great question. I mean, I think to a certain extent, right, this is already happening. So if you think about film composers, they're just total experts in all the things that we have been discussing, is the first thing I'd say. And then the second is that we actually have a very cool experiment on that right now, where we installed a kiosk at a museum in Berlin. So we have thousands and thousands of people coming in, putting on headphones at this kiosk, listening to an excerpt and telling us what they imagine. So it just allows a scale of data collection that's huge,
fast data.
But we also have a graffiti wall there where people are seeing the kind of topics from the last 5 participants. And we're looking at how that affects how they think about the music. And we can vary, which strand of last 5 participants.
Oh my gosh,
so then we can do a cultural evolution thing about how this changes across time.
We want a kiosk here.
That is, yes. I don't know if we're going to do high-end research like that, but it'd be fun.
I mean, you can just walk over and download the records. You're just around the corner. Wow. Well, evil genius. Evil genius.
I think you should ask Elizabeth the last question that you have. I think it's pretty interesting.
Yes. Number 30. So we've gone from 3 to 30.
We went from number 3 to number 30. Sorry, questions 4 through 29.
We recently sat down with musician Chris Harford to discuss music, and we talked briefly about contemporary modes of dissemination. How has modern technology, streaming, TikTok, algorithms change how we experience music?
I've talked about this so much with my students, especially about TikTok, because all of the kinds of processes I've just been talking about seem like they're happening faster, because things emerge on TikTok soundtracks, become super viral, disappear on like 2-week cycles, such that my students were telling me as we went through all this research that we've been talking about, they're like, I can hear this one song and it's not just 2020, it's like, May of 2020. Like it's just really tightly, connected to particular time. So that means when they hear it, it really brings back that particular moment in time versus, I think when I hear songs, I can get to teenage years or like a decade or something. And they've just got this really
it's not like you're thinking,
fine-tuned.
That was May 2020. I remember that so well. Yeah.
I think it's because, the top 40 song cycles when we were growing up just had a slower, trajectory.
I also think it's like I remember like buying an album and you buy an album and you listen to it like 8 million times. And
people still do that, I will say. So this is because they don't have to, right? You could listen to everything all the time. It's and you can actually discover this really concretely with like Spotify Wrapped or like these services that kind of track what you're listening to. And even when I think people have a sense that they're like really interesting listeners who listen to a wide variety of things, you can get kind of good reality check with some of
looking
those
at people's
you're listening to 8 songs.
Top 25 played or whatever Apple tracks it. So your most played.
Yes, that's a great place to look if you use Apple Music, because often those first few are in the hundreds, or I don't know what it's like for you, but
thousands.
Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah.
What does that say about somebody that listens to songs on repeat constantly?
It says you are a person, because that really is not a unique way of approaching music. And in fact,
I mean,
yeah.
And I know we're talking.
So
way too long.
TikTok and streaming or TikTok and social media, they, because of all the trending, and like you said, when this started a couple of years ago, trending would be, almost like a month.
Yeah.
And now trending is like a couple of days.
Yeah.
And so they're going through stuff, so much quicker. And so the time period that people are going to remember are just months or weeks versus us whole decades. Like,
exactly. Are we all now memory savants because we have this,
I was thinking about that because, you probably see it in social media, it pops up and it's like, if you hear this song, and it's Madonna is the one I hear. If you hear this song, like the 90s come streaming back or the 80s come streaming back. It's like these kids, like I look at my daughters and I'm like, they're not going to have those same, it'll be different, but they won't have those same sort of experiences, I don't think, but maybe they will.
But that's also so interesting when songs come back. Like, I guess Madonna sang like a prayer at Coachella. I don't know if you followed this.
I didn't see the whole thing. I popped up on wherever, Instagram or whatever.
Yeah. But what it does mean is that then, or like if you think about Kate Bush and like Running Up That Hill or something, and there are these songs that can feel one way for one generation and one way for another generation. And those are also like interesting, almost cross-cultural points of reference.
Yeah. Good stuff.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking we've taken so much of Elizabeth's time.
I really appreciate all of your really wonderful questions, both
this
on
could go
paper
on for hours for me,
and
as you can
in
tell.
person. Just thanks so much for being such thoughtful.
It's really fascinating.
Partners.
I feel like it's such a intrinsic part of all of us that you can't help but sort of put your own personal experience into all the things you're talking about.
Actually, something that's really important to me in the book is that this isn't like for musician or music. It's like every person
who feels,
if you are alive, this is an experience you probably had.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you so
on
much.
The book.
I really appreciate it.
I'm excited to read it.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And I didn't write anything down, so feel free to use anything that you want.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much.
I think we took that time and
Thank you for listening. Open Studio is produced by Adam Welch and Liza Peck. Editing is by Adam Welch. Original score by Chris Harper. Special thanks to the Arts Council of Princeton crew. I'm Adam Welch.